This was really an important book, Ecclesiastes, and just a little bit of history. I've been kind of working in this book more and less intensively over the last 50 years or so, and it's really become an important and a favorite book of mine. And you may think, well, that's strange because there's so much negative stuff in it, but we'll talk about that. And we've got plenty of time, so we're going to go through the book in some detail. But this morning I want to go over it in an overview of what I think the whole thing is about. And I'll come back to that when we get into it. And my goal is really two or threefold. One of the things I'd like to do is to kind of rescue Ecclesiastes, at least in popular understanding, from some of the more problematic perspectives that people have dealt with the book from. And they are many. I think more than any other book of the Bible, Ecclesiastes has been kind of rendered in different directions. And then on the flip side of that is to restore the book in one sense as an important source of pastoral theology, not just for the time it was written, but for us today, because what Solomon was dealing with is really a timeless truth, and so an understanding of the book toward that. Now, disclaimer: I'm not the source of any of these insights. They're found everywhere, scattered around, and I've kind of looked at them and used them in aiding me to think through the book. Ultimately, an interpretation of the book is dependent upon, or is in line with how well the book is just looked at as a whole, and whether it makes sense, whether it rings true, whether it really fits with God's word and what we know of God. And so that's where we're going. I've taught this over like the last 50 years, all the way from a devotional standpoint to a college level course. So that's where we're going. What I've handed you today is an overwhelming array of arrows and things. And I'm not going through this today, but I am going through the content of this today. And this I'm giving to you basically as something you can go back and look at to kind of trace the thinking that I think is going on in the book. So I'm going to present what is the substance of this front and back today, but not referring to this particularly, but there will be some overlaps. You know, when you start out on a trip, you need a map, road map. Now, back before our digital assistants, we actually had to get the paper out and unfold it, or grab our Rand McNally Atlas and, start traveling. And today people don't do that. They put in an address or say, I want to go here, and then a voice comes and says, well, go here, turn right, and start down this and turn left. Now, I don't know about you, but you can only trust that so far. I've had occasion where I've Googled in something at a map and I've started driving, and it may have been driving an athletic team when I was in a college or just myself. And you get to the end and you say, wait a minute, this isn't where I wanted to go. I can remember coming into a town late with a bus full of student athletes, and I see the hotel right over there that we're supposed to go to, but it's telling me to go this way. And so I had to go down there and do this and do this and do this. I could have just turned and gone there, okay? So just having verbal, clues and assuming they're going to end up in the right place is not always wise to do. And so I always like to start out with an overview of the whole trip. And that's in my mind. And then if for some reason I get off of that, I can be aware, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't seem right. And so what I want to do is this morning is give a roadmap, kind of the whole destination. Now, the book doesn't unfold like that. The book unfolds as great literature, and it teases us along and it develops slowly. But there's so much floating around about what Ecclesiastes is thought to be about that I want to give us a big picture, kind of a whole view. And then we will go back and we will work through the parts in detail to the conclusion. And then depending on how much time, I'll go back and look at some of the more details in between, because this book is rich in pastoral theology from the hand of wisest of people. And I'm going to assume for now that it is Solomon. I think it was Solomon. We'll look at him and his authorship. But this morning I want to kind of get a big theme picture, and so that we kind of know where we're going. And then I want to work through how we get there and let you judge whether this is what makes good sense out of the book. So let's get started with that. And I've titled this series "Joy When Life Jostles." This is a book about joy. It's one of the dominant themes in the book, and yet it gets kind of left out and forgotten about in some of the more so-called pessimistic viewpoints. But the other way to conceive of this book is as Job's perplexing twin. And I will relate the concept of Ecclesiastes to the book of Job later on this morning. I want to give you a little a thought test here. I was actually preaching through this at this time, and I was out on a trout stream, and the trout weren't biting that morning. And I turned around and I saw what is a perfect introduction to the book of Ecclesiastes. And so there I am. The fish are doing something, not biting. And I look behind me, and this is what I saw on my favorite trout stream in northeast Iowa. So I want to ask you, what words come to mind in describing this phenomenon that we see here on that trout stream in the cold morning, and what we find here with regard to what's being emitted from the teapot? What words come to mind? Vapor, mist, steam, okay. You go fog, cloud. So a variety of words, misty, fuzzy, hazy, unclear, indistinct. But yeah, vaporous is the one that most adequately describes that, isn't it? And so that's really, really interesting. Now, vaporous could be synonyms, could be airy, ethereal, fleeting, insubstantial. But how about these? Meaningless, vain, futile, or useless? None of you said any of those when we looked at this steam, did you? Why? Well, because those words don't bring that to mind, do they? I used to start my Old Testament survey when I was teaching Ecclesiastes out with this question, and one student did say meaningless. One of my colleagues put him up to it, knowing that that's how he introduced the course. And so he was just pulling a class prank. But those words don't come to mind, do they? And yet that is exactly how the book starts out, when it's something of something, all is something. And so various translations you open, in fact, almost every translation you open will start something like this: all is vain, meaningless, everything is meaningless, futile, absolute futility, or useless, not vaporous. That really isn't what the word is saying. The Hebrew word is hevel. And the renderings are vain, which is having no real value or marked by futility, futile, serving no useful purpose, completely ineffective. There is a sense in which the word futile will have to do with what we're saying, but we'll have to look at that later. Pointless, which is devoid of meaning, or meaningless, having no significance. So these are the common renderings of how this book starts. But the translation, if it were to be translated, rather than given a concept, was something like breath. Breath of a breath, the slightest breath, all is a breath. Now, what's been communicated so far? Not much. What's your next thought? What are you getting at? Breath? What do you mean, breath of breath? Well, Kathleen Farmer, in her commentary on Ecclesiastes, says this about this word. She says, but what does hevel mean? In its simplest and most basic sense, hevel means a puff of air, a breath, or a vapor. This sense of hevel can be seen in the RSV, the Revised Standard Version, in Isaiah 57:13. The wind will carry them off, a breath will take them away. And then she mentions a translation by Mr. Scott in the Anchor Bible, preserves this concrete, basic sense of hevel when he renders Ecclesiastes 1:2 as breath of a breath, the slightest breath, all is a breath. So this is really the idea of what this word means, vapor or the slightest of breath. So we need to think about this. I mean, this is the beginning of the book. This sets the tone for where the discussion is going to go. But unfortunately, in modern translations, virtually all of them, a different direction gets set. Somewhat accidentally, perhaps, but nonetheless with real effect. So the Hebrew word means vapor or a puff of breath. Where does the English come from? Well, probably goes back to Jerome a long time ago in his Latin Bible, and he translated it as vanitas or vanitas, okay? Now, in Latin, that word could mean two different things. It could mean unsubstantial or lacking permanence, which is what vapor is, right? But it was also used as something that is useless or futile or illusory. Now, steam out of a teapot is not illusory, is it? It's there, you can see it. You put your hand in it, you feel it, okay? Now, the problem is that today, in our English language, the word vain or vanity is used in lacking in value, useless or worthless or futile. But it's not being used today in the other sense. The sense that did give a sense of vapor or mist or something like that. So innocently enough, things like this get introduced into translation and into commentary history. And at a certain point, it gets very, very difficult to dislodge understandings and traditions that come through commentaries. Now you say, okay, you're going to take on all the commentaries. No, I'm not going to do that, okay? But we do need to think through the text from the way it's stated. So what we're dealing here is with an object, when we see this word meaning mist or vapor, but vanitas is not an object, is it? It's a concept. It's a concept. And this is actually in the handout I gave you to just illustrate this. So when we encounter a translation like vanity of vanities, says the preacher, all is vanity, or other traditional translations like futility or meaningless, what we're actually dealing with is an expression that is abstract and negative, okay? It's an abstract concept. But hevel is not abstract, is it? Now, it's fleeting, you can't grasp it, but that's going to be the point of the book. So we've got that, and it would be better to think about translated as vapor of vapors, all is vaporous, or thinnest of vapors, all is a puff of breath. Now that still hasn't given us the meaning of the book, but the meaning of the book comes by reading the whole book. So we're getting started. So in contrast, if you translate this, what we have is an expression that is concrete and neutral. Now, not concrete like your sidewalk, okay? Concrete meaning it's a real object. Now, you know, it's hard for us to think of steam being an object, but it is. You can see it, you can feel it, it's doing stuff, all right? And so it's concrete and it's neutral because you don't know yet how it's going to be used. And this is an unfortunate thing with reading this book in the English is immediately you're put into a negative mindset about what's coming on. But in the Hebrew text, that's not there. What are we dealing with? We're dealing with a metaphor. Oh, here we go, back to English, okay? Now, I'm not going to give you a really difficult concept in English. Metaphor is really, really easy. What's a metaphor do? It's a comparison of two unlike things for the point of communicating something. So you've got thing one and thing two things being compared. Well, we've got one thing already, don't we? We've got the mist. Farmer says this, she continues, this translation enables English readers to see that the phrase, all is hevel, is actually a metaphor. The thematic statement of the book is expressed as a figure of speech. Like all other metaphors, it invites its hearers to look for the qualities that two essentially unlike things have in common. Okay? That's a metaphor. We use them all the time, don't we? My car is a dog. Both the speaker and the hearer of a metaphor know that the two entities which are compared are alike in some ways and unlike in other ways. Thus, when the poet Carl Sandburg tells us that the fog comes on little cat feet, we can appreciate the poet's insight into the quality of movement shared by fogs and cats without expecting the fog to purr or to leave paw prints. Similarly, when we find that in Ecclesiastes everything under the sun is compared to a puff of air, we ought to consider what points of similarity there might be between these two essentially unlike entities. Okay, so we're dealing with a metaphor, and here is Robert Frost's poem. The fog comes on little cat feet. It sits looking over harbor and city on silent haunches and then moves on. Okay? You see that? You see the cat comes in like fog. Cats are devious like that. You don't hear them coming? Okay. And they sit and then they're gone. All right? That's what poets do. They use metaphors and things. So a metaphor, it's the direct comparison of two unlike things. So obviously we're dealing with a metaphor. Now, is this what the metaphor is getting at? Those are clouds. Clouds in a different form. No, those thunderstorms and lightning. So we're kind of dealing with, no, we're not dealing with the same, it's a different phenomenon. It's a breath. It's vague, it's unclear, fleeting, insubstantial, exactly what is going on here. So we've got this idea of metaphor. And so metaphor is one thing being compared to another. The question is, what is the next thing? The first thing is vapor, all right? What's vapor being compared to? The book hasn't told us yet. But what would you expect, as with this beginning, to find next when a metaphor is introduced? What would you expect? An explanation. What is the metaphor being compared to? Well, interestingly enough, the next verse says, what does man gain from all his labor in which he labors under the sun? Huh? Well, how's it being compared to that? Okay, but there it is. That's the next statement. You would expect the idea of the metaphor to start to be unpacked here. And indeed it is. And in fact, understanding this statement throughout the rest of the book is critical to getting a hold of what it is that Ecclesiastes is talking about. So we can summarize it, though, it must be being compared to laboring to gain something. That's pretty, so laboring. Now, laboring is something that's concrete, it's an action. But, that communicates, people might think of different things they do that would be labor. and different things that they might do to gain something. So we're beginning to see how it's unpacked here. So how do we go about determining what this is? Well, Farmer continues, metaphors are intentionally provocative figures of speech which can be understood in quite different ways. For instance, leaven is used as a metaphor for both good influence and bad. Not all Bible scholars hold that, but I think that that's reasonable. It is possible then that hevel, meaning a puff of air, might be understood in either a positive or a negative sense. If the translation preserves the metaphor, as Scott does, which he referred to earlier, the reader is forced to decide in what sense the comparison should be taken. In my opinion, she says that it's unfortunate that many modern versions of Ecclesiastes have chosen to take the decision away from the reader by translating it as a negative concept, right? You saw that. Most translations obscure the metaphorical nature of the original statement and replace the concrete, non-judgmental phrase, breath or puff of air, with various abstract terms, all of which have decidedly negative connotations in English. Even if a case could be made for replacing a metaphor with an adjective or a descriptive phrase, there are legitimate grounds for challenging the negative connotations of the words which many modern translators use to translate hevel in Ecclesiastes. So you see what she's getting at, you know? Leave it as it is until it becomes clear in the text what's going on, instead of putting it into a concept which is negative and then determining the rest of the book's meaning by that. And this is what we have continually to deal with in literature. So you're going to have to understand how this word is used, this word of labor and profit. So it's the idea of what's gained, what profit is there from labor. Now, how are you going to do that? Well, if you look at English, you realize that that you've got different words translating same words in different languages. And so are you lost because you can't read Hebrew? Well, no. There are ways to get around this. For example, using Strong's Concordance. This is just an example. This is from the website Open Bible or Bible Hub, which is just online and free, and you can go in and use it. But if you want to say, well, I wonder what word lies behind this word profit. Now, you could do the same thing with the word translated meaningless, and you'd find hevel, and you'd find a discussion about hevel being vaporous or something. And right there you'd say, well, that's a different connotation than what my translation has. So this is work that you can do in studying the text. I'm going to do a bunch of it for you, give you my summary. But we're looking at the word profit. So you use this tool of Strong's numbering system, where he would go through and identify for you the roots that underlie Greek and Hebrew in the Bible. And it's been really helpful to students over the years. It used to only be, of course, in a hard form. But you notice that it gives the original word, it's yitron, and gives you some beginning to look at it. Notice what he gives us 3 meanings down here in the bottom: better, excellent, or profitable. Now, those are strictly synonyms. And the interesting thing is, you find in Ecclesiastes, in any version you read, all 3 of these used to translate the same Hebrew word. So, it kind of gets concealed. Well, he gives some examples here and of this word profit. What profit? What gain? And you can see here, it's in 1:3. One translation says what advantage, another says what profit, and then in 2:11, there is no profit, no profit. Notice in verses 2, verse 13, wisdom excels folly. That's the same word for gain. There's gain in wisdom over folly. Now, the question, what profit is there, what gain, assumes a negative answer. And you immediately assume, well, the answer is going to be there is none. What does this say? The book says there is gain in something, right? There's gain in wisdom, over folly, and there's gain and light over darkness. So that word gain is used in some different contexts, and there are going to be a number of statements where it says there's no gain, and then there's going to be other statements that there's gain. So what does that suggest we do? Well, we have to read the book and we have to start paying attention to, well, what context is no gain used in, and what context is there gain used in? So you see what's going on here? You have to get a hold of this. I'm going to share with you how we get a hold of it, and then as you read through, you don't have to know Hebrew to say, well, he's saying there's gain in something here, so he must not be talking about the same thing he's talking about in 1:3. There's no gain. And once you understand that, the whole book just kind of opens up. And in fact, what we're going to find in this book, and we'll spend a considerable part of one session looking at, there are 3 work words, 3 words that are used for work. And they're used very specifically, they're used in very clear ways and clear contexts. But of course, in our English translations, as translations are wont to do, you just can't get around it. Those work words aren't consistently translated. So it just kind of all gets lost in the shuffle. And you say, even with the people who received this from Solomon, did they really see this? Did they really understand this? I don't think they did the first time through. And how were they receiving it? In a written form? Probably audibly. So every time you came across hevel would be read, they would think breath. They would think vaporous. Every time the word yitron came along, they'd think, oh, gain or profit or something. But they would hear the same word used in different contexts and different kinds of statements, which is harder to do in English translations. So I'm just sharing. I'm going to have to share some technical things with you, but you can find this all on your own. Once you see what's going on here, it'll resolve the facts. So right away, we already know that in this book, there's going to be negative and positive statements about what can be gained about labor. Now, okay, well, it's contradictory. It's not of God, then throw it out. Okay, another example of contradictions in the Bible. Now, there's some apparent contradictions here, but once we see that when they're used in context, it makes sense as to what's being talked about in that point, then those problems fade away. So we go about determining what words mean by seeing how it's translated everywhere in the book, and then seeing how the word is used in each context in the book. So we're off on a trail, we're off on a quest, we're off on our journey, okay? But notice the journey is not emphasizing concepts, it's emphasizing words used in context. And that's important. Too often when anybody, including theologians and scholars and so forth, read the Bible, they're thinking in terms of concepts, rather in terms of what is this piece of literature saying. And the way we determine what a piece of literature is saying is by looking at its structure. Now, I'm giving you a lot of just kind of background stuff on interpretation and so forth. And I'm doing it intentionally because you have to get in your mind that Scripture is to be read not by verses, but by sections, by paragraphs, by sections, by chapters, by whole books. All right? That is the most violated aspect of biblical interpretation that there is not reading a book in a structure. When you pick up a book and you don't know what kind of a book it is, somebody says, here, this is a great book, and you open up page 1 and says, it was a dark and cloudy night, and suddenly a shot rang out across the moor. What kind of a book are you in? A murder mystery. And your friend says, hey, look at how this book ends. And they lived happily ever after. What kind of a book just ended? A fairy tale, okay? So there are little clues to different kinds of books. And so whatever book you open up is going to be organized around the structure of whatever the genre, the type of literature it needs to be in order to communicate what's being communicated. And so that's what we have to think about. And so I want to just take a moment to just think through this idea of structure. Meaning is determined first of all by words in structure, not by, whatever word comes into my mind or how it may be used somewhere else, or by my theological dictionary, all right, but by how it's used in its context. Now, translations really work at trying to get at this. And for the most part, most translations do a good job of getting at it. But there are some books, like Ecclesiastes, that's more critical than others. And so I just want to kind of go to the foundation here. David A. Dorsey, in his book, The Literary Structure of the Old Testament, says this. He says, all literary compositions have structure. A book, a person, letter, a sermon, even a recipe has an internal arrangement, sometimes referred to as surface structure. A typical sermon, for example, may be organized into 3 parts: introduction, body of 3 points, and conclusion. Let's think about recipes, okay? I do quite a bit of cooking, and I read recipes. Or you read the list, okay? The list of ingredients sometimes is in the order of how you're going to use them. Sometimes they're just there. Sometimes they're in liquids, and sometimes they're in the dry. So what if I just wrote out each item, threw it in a bag, picked one out, and said, okay, this is what I do first. Okay? No. Recipes, have a structure, especially if you're doing something that's complicated and you're making a meringue at the end of your pie. I mean, you don't just start anywhere. You observe the structure. Now, intuitively, we do that with literature, all right? But sometimes we don't. He goes on, a sermon would not be appreciated or understandable if it simply consisted of hundreds of unrelated statements, one after another, without any discernible order. The practice of structuring communication, whether written or oral, is universal among humans, as shown by studies among numerous languages and dialects throughout the world. Humans need and appreciate communication that is arranged and organized. Far too often, people read the Bible as verses. They read a verse, they say, okay, God, what are you telling me through this verse? You know what the first thing he's trying to tell you is? Well, read the verses around it before you start trying to answer that, okay? But we violate that all the time. The Bible is not a collection of verses. It's a collection of literature, and the literature has a form, and that form is critical to understanding what God is intending to communicate. This was true in ancient Israel. The pages of the Old Testament reflect a keen interest in literary structure. Hebrew authors and editors generally took great pains to arrange their compositions in ways that would help convey their messages. So when we're reading for meaning, when we're reading for understanding, we have to pay attention to that structure. And so the interpretive process has to follow along intentionally. Now, you may remember this when we went through church history and we paused to look about how the Bible needs to be read in comparison with allegory. I presented this. And this is from Validity and Interpretation by E.D. Hirsch. And he says, basically, when we read, we all do this. When we have a conversation with each other, we all do this. There's initial guess about what's being talked about. You all have had the experience where you're talking to somebody, and you're saying this, and they're responding. Then one of the person says something that's just completely out of context. The other person says, what are we talking about? Well, I'm talking about this. Oh, I'm talking about this. Anybody not had those? I mean, we do, okay? Because to a certain point, what's said fits both of the people's initial guess about what the conversation is, but at some point, it doesn't. And then you have to go back and adjust. Oh, that's what we're talking about. Okay, well, what I meant and what you meant. Okay, so we've had that experience. What he's saying is here, when we read literature, the same thing. We make a guess about what this paragraph is about, what this book is about. And then we study the details and, say, did they hang together? And if they don't, then we modify the proposition, restudy it, and we repeat it until we get it, okay? So what we're saying is when we're reading something, when we think it's maybe a paragraph about this, and all of a sudden something said that's not that, then we have an issue. So we make initial guesses. When you read the book of Ecclesiastes and you're reading a translation that says meaningless, meaningless, all is meaningless, and you decide, well, the rest of this book is about meaninglessness, and then you start running into statements that contradict that, what do you do? What do you do? It says, well, maybe I need to rethink what this book is about. Maybe I need to rethink what's going on. So you get these dissonances. You have these statements in the squiggly lines, and they all line up, but here's a couple of statements that just don't fit with the others. There just seems to be a grade there. It's, whoa, that can't be talking about this. That's what I thought, And so what do? You deal with the dissonance. Well, you check the understanding of the conflicting parts and you adjust as may be necessary. You look more closely at the meaning of the word. You look more closely at the larger context and so forth. Now, you can force something that doesn't fit to fit, and interpreters and Christians and people do that all the time. Well, I'll just make it say this. There, that resolves it. But is that really what it's saying? You alter the proposition, you deal with the parts, you go through 1 and 3. So you're reading through, and what I'm saying is, let's rethink this word hevel. Let's rethink. And let's look at it in its context, and then let's see if my understanding of the whole gets changed any. And so what we do is we go through a process of readjusting that original guess, the original proposition, and then checking the parts again and seeing how they work, until finally we come at an understanding that we would consider, okay, this is what makes the most sense. This is the understanding that I can validate better than any others that I've come to. Now, that's a complex process. You do that every day in every communicative situation. We automatically do that. We have to. When somebody says, here, take this, it'll be good for your gout or your whatever. If it's not made to be taken orally, you don't want to take it orally. So we interpret everything, and we just do this naturally because God has made us as communicative people. But when it comes to the Bible, we can make it say the craziest things, can't we? All right? But God's trying to communicate. God is not hiding what he said, but he's communicating through literature. And so we have to come to appreciate how that works. So in Ecclesiastes, we've got a number of structural elements. We'll deal with these, and I'll show you how they fit together. There's a double introduction. There are all kinds of repetitions, some of which are exactly identical and some of which are not completely identical. There's questions, there's metaphors, a controlling metaphor we've looked at. There's poetry. There's this trilogy of work words, which we'll give attention to. There's a really key refrain that has to do with enjoying life. And it's not the hedonistic joy of life, it's the joy that God expects us. And then there's a double epilogue. Now, right after we come to that statement that there's no prophet, we find a poem. A poem. One generation goes, another generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun also rises, the sun goes down and hurries to its place where it rises. The wind goes toward the south, turns toward the north, it turns around continually as it goes, and the wind returns again to its courses. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place where the rivers flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness, or perhaps better translated, and this is grammarians suggest this, constantly in activity, beyond uttering. We can't even begin to describe what we see. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. That which has been is that which shall be, and that which has been done is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun. Okay? Is there a thing of which it may be said, behold, this is new? It's been long ago, in the ages which were before us. Now, the modern readers say, oh, wait a minute, that's just crazy. I got a new iPhone, and it's got AI. You tell me there's nothing new under the sun? There's new things all the time. Is that the context? No. He's talking about something else. And then he says, there's no memorial of the former, neither shall there be any of the latter that are to come. Now, kind of a perplexive poem. I've been thinking about this more recently. But what we have here is an introduction, some examples of what the introduction is about, and then the immediate impact that we have with regard to these examples. And then there's the application. Now, this poem should be expected to be fitting in with somehow this theme that's been introduced, something about this metaphor. And the first thing is what we see is age to age to age to age to age. Now, the word generation is used, and this word, Hebrew word dor, sometimes can mean generation, but it also can mean just an expanse of time that would be analogous to a generation. And that's about the biggest measure of time that you would find in the Bible. You don't find well. It's the largest common use of time. So age probably is what's going on here. It's not talking about generations like Generation X or Generation Z that have characteristics. The point is there's just this long sequential eras, okay, times, ages. And yet, there is something that is stable, that sees all that through. The earth remains forever. Now, again, forever is as long as anybody knows, thinks of. This isn't a scientific textbook. So, what we have is this these succession of times, these continual cycles, but there's something underneath that is not affected by those, that's stable, that's underpinning. And then he gives some examples. The sun rises and sets and it repeats. The wind goes from the south to the north, repeats. The rivers run into the sea and repeats. So we have this idea of repetitiveness, but in the context of a consistency of some kind, don't we? Now, is that negative? No, it's just observation. Okay, observation. You ever stand and just watch water flow through a river and wonder about it? Amazing. You try to pick it up and it's just gone. And yet you fall on it out of an airplane and you die. It's like landing on cement. I mean, it's just amazing. And yet it just keeps going. Where's it come from? Where's it go? And so there's just this mystery, this tantalizing mystery about it. But there's something underneath. What we have here, when he says, it goes on and you don't get tired, is there's just this unceasing activity that's wondrous beyond description, yet embraced without boredom. You ever get tired of seeing sunsets or sunrises? No. Are they meaningless? No, but some readings of the book say everything is meaningless. The days are they don't make any sense. Solomon isn't writing about a day making sense. He's writing about something else. So the point is that there's a limit to what these observable phenomena reveal about the whole system. What God chooses to reveal across all of time does not and can never explain all there is to know about the whole. Scientists work at this thing called unified field theory. It's try to explain in physics terms, how everything works, so gravity and all of this stuff. Okay, have we found it? Did Einstein think he found it? Thought he did. Did he? No. You know what? We'll never find it. We'll never find it. Because that's what this book is about. Okay? And right here, he's given an example. In the physical realm, we have all these things that, I can predict when the sun's going to rise and when it's going to set. And I can look at the clouds and I can predict things are going to happen. But tell me where they come from and how it's all controlled? Nope, beyond. So the poem, right at the beginning, starts to unpack this metaphor. Well, maybe the understanding of how it all works is kind of like vapor. Okay? There's something there, You know there's something that holds it all together, but can you get a hold of it? No. So this poem begins to unpack what is going on in the book. Now, what I want to do is share 3 sets of verses, which I think give us the essence of what Ecclesiastes is about. And I'll come back to each of these and we'll deal with them in the section as the discussion progresses. But at the end of the second introduction in Ecclesiastes 1, 13 and 14, Solomon says, I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom concerning all that is done under the sky. That is one of the work words. It's a heavy burden that God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. Now here's one of those examples where the English tends to be more negative than it is. I've got these words with asterisks. The word simply means to be busied with something. What's your business? What do you busy yourself with during the day? Well, I'm a carpenter, or I'm an engineer. Okay, that's not negative, is it? No. What it's doing is saying, this is my occupation, here's my task, here's my big picture of what I give my life to. And so it is going to be burdensome, but it's not innately. It's going to come with another aspect. It's a heavy burden that God has given to the sons of men to be busied with. Okay, literally what it says. I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and behold, all is vaporous and chasing after wind. Okay, doesn't mean meaningless. Okay, the sunrise is not meaningless. You know, I can't tell what the meaning of it is in all of time in the universe, but it's not meaningless. It's delightful. And then in chapter 3, I've seen the burden, the business, which God has given to the sons of men to be busied with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in their hearts, yet so that man can't find out the work that God has done from the beginning even to the end. The work that God has done. This isn't what Solomon's doing, is it? What's the subject here is the work that God has done. Does anybody want to say the work that God has done is meaningless? Vain. No. Can you say it's mysterious? Can you say it's like trying to grasp the wind to get a hold of it? Well, yeah, you can say that. Well, that's going to be the point of the book. I'll come back to this in a moment. And then it's going to say the same thing in chapter 8. When I applied my heart to know wisdom and to see the business that is done on the earth. Notice how even this translation changed burden to business that's done on the earth. For also there is neither day nor night sees sleep with his eyes. Then I saw all the work of God. That's what's involved here. That man can't find out the work that is done under the sun, because however much a man labors to seek it out, he won't find it. Yes, moreover, though a wise man thinks he can comprehend it, yet he won't be able to find it. So what we have going on here is that the book is about a certain quest, a certain thing that Solomon has tasked himself with, that he's busy about, okay? And it's going to have a whole lot of facets. And it's this: I have seen the business, the task, it's one of the work words we'll look at, which God has given to the sons of men to be busied with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in their hearts. What does that mean? Eternity in their hearts. A sense that there's something else? Yeah, that's true. But notice what is followed up. What follows that up? Yet so that man can't find out the work that God has done from the beginning even to the end. So what is eternity in their hearts in this context? The innate desire and yearning to know how it all fits together. Where'd that come from? God. He's made us like himself to think about cause and effect, outcomes, and that's what the book of Proverbs is based upon. And we're going to see that in Ecclesiastes as well. So he has given us that desire. Yet, no one, including the wisest man on earth, is going to make any progress in putting it all together. It's going to be like vapor. It's going to be like grasping the wind. So that's what's going on here, is that it's the work of God that that Solomon is looking at. So when it goes back to verse 3, what does man gain from all his labor in which he labors under the sun? Labor as hard as you want in every area that you can conceive of to answer that question. How this from that? Okay? Now, so that's going to be fruitless. That's going to be a fruitless, in that sense, futile exercise. He's not talking about finding the meaning of life. He's talking about tracing the cause and effect from God's perspective of everything that's ever happened. Okay? And what we call that is providence. Really simple. It's a theological definition that God graciously guides and governs all events, including the free acts of men and their external circumstances, and directs all things to their appointed ends for His glory. What he's about here is not finding what makes life meaningful and significant. He's already written about that in the book of Proverbs. The fool and the wise man. Do this, don't do that. That's not what he's about. He's wondering about all these things that happen that I don't understand it. Now, you're going to find a lot of negative statements in the book of Ecclesiastes. But they're negative with regard to, God, this really troubles me. Why the good die young and the wicked prolong their lives in their wickedness. Does that bother you any? I don't think there's probably one person in this room who hasn't personally or known somebody who hasn't just been completely shaken in their lives by something that God allowed to happen to them. It's tough, isn't it? Does faith just wipe those away and say, don't ever worry about it? No. In fact, it's the person of faith who is often more troubled by those things than the people who don't. If you're just a fatalist, or if you say, no, nothing makes sense, if you truly you buy into the philosophers that says life is meaningless, why would that bother you? But if you know that there's a moral governor of the universe who, has standards and is in control of all things, those inexplicable events that happen are bothersome. And that's what Solomon is about in this book. So Proverbs is wisdom trains for success. God's world has order. And Proverbs is, if you do this, expect this to happen. Okay? And if you do this negatively, expect this to happen, all right? Does that work 100% of the time? Does that make Proverbs not true? No. Because in the Bible, there are two other books, Job and Kohelet, Ecclesiastes. Wisdom embraces the inexplicable. God is still free. Okay? That's what Solomon is about in this book. J. Stafford Wright in Expositor's Bible Commentary puts it like this. Ecclesiastes was clearly written as a discussion guide for people prepared to think out their response to God's unseen hand in life and history. God's unseen hand. Although it contains practical advice, it would appeal to a different public than Proverbs. One may link it to Job. The wisdom writings have a twofold scope. First, they set out the rules of life for an individual who wishes to be a member of a prosperous society and who looks for the right way to build up a God-fearing conscience. These rules form the book of Proverbs. Society, however, is not ideal. Mankind has a fundamental twist, and there will always be cases where a person finds things happening to him that he cannot reconcile with the promises of Proverbs. Proverbs says, if you delight yourself in God, your enemies will be at peace with you. That's a rough paraphrase of 2 or 3 verses. Did that work with Christ? No. Okay. So it's not, Proverbs aren't promises. All right. He may suffer when he expects the temporal blessings of God, and others who deserve punishment may prosper. This second scope of wisdom writing is taken up by Job and Ecclesiastes, each in his own way. Job shows the nature of testing and something of Satan's challenge, but Ecclesiastes explores these things more widely. And so that's what's going on here. That's what it's about. And so to put the whole book together, I think there are three statements, three parts of one statement. And this is my summary of the book, okay? Frustrated in his exhaustive efforts to understand God's providential design as it impacts our earthly experience. That's what frustrates him. That's what he will say, this is just beyond me, and I just feel like this and this and this, all right? Kohelet's a name we'll talk about later, concludes that one must still enjoy life as a gift from God. This is a main refrain of the book. You know, when you're frustrated beyond mind, your labors just seem to just see the good in your labor, enjoy life as a gift to God. This isn't hedonism. This is God's gift to you, and by faith, you need to learn to enjoy life. That's what this book is about. That's one of the dominant themes of this book. But all the while living it responsibly by trusting in the one to whom he must ultimately give an account. And so the epilogue, the double epilogue brings this together. So it's, you're going to take life seriously, and there are going to be things that just drive you crazy, wondering, God, why do you allow this? How does this fit? But life's still a good gift. You see, some people, when they feel like God has let them down, despair, or lose their faith, or walk away. Say, I can't continue to worship a God who would let this or that or the other happen. You probably know somebody in that category. You may have been in that category at one time yourself, or tempted that way. But Ecclesiastes is canceling, no, God is still good God. He's still a righteous, good, moral judge of the universe. Don't despair of life. Accept it as a good gift and worship God. Do it by faith. Now, there's three things this makes Ecclesiastes so important. First, it affirms God as the good, sovereign, and moral governor of our world. Solomon may seem to be questioning God's rule of the world, but in reality, he isn't. He's saying it seems like. It's like those psalms, the lament psalms. My God, why have you forsaken me? Has God ever forsaken anyone? No, but emotionally, it feels like that. So you've got some of that going on in Ecclesiastes. Secondly, it deals seriously with the troublesome, unanswerable why questions of our earthly experience. God does not owe us any answers. He's shown us enough of his character that we can trust him even in the pain that he lets us go through when we find these things. And while we would like to have answers, ultimately it's like trying to grasp the wind. The vapor, it's vaporous. You cannot get a hold of it. So how do we live life? It counsels the believer to accept life with all its perplexities and problems as a good gift to be lived by faith. And this is the essence of the book of Ecclesiastes. It's powerful in its ability to shepherd. And in fact, the author is going to be called the shepherd in the last chapter. So this is what I think the book is all about. The handout I've given you, the 2 pages, just kind of is a way to think through that roadmap, the big picture. And I'm not going to be giving handouts every day, but we'll go back and we'll just kind of look at some of the processes that go through, and in the process redeem the book from some of the negative ways that it's construed that don't have to be taken that way once we realize what's going on.